Good afternoon, everybody. One of our speaker series today is May 19th, and we're here with Tim Cahill, who's the president and executive director of the Quincy Chamber of Commerce. He spent his professional career working in both public and private sectors as an entrepreneur. For over 20 years, he served in government, from rising from the city council in Quincy to treasurer and receiver general of the Commonwealth. Currently, Tim is the president and executive director, as I mentioned, of the Quincy Chamber of Commerce. He represents over 500 businesses, both around the city of Quincy, in and around. And so far, he's also serving as executive director of Quincy 2000, which is the city's public and private economic develop arm, so to speak. And without further ado, we'll hand it over to Tim. Thanks again, Tim, for doing this. This is great.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. And hopefully I can keep you entertained, or at least interested, or hopefully awake for the next few minutes. And then I guess we'll open it up for some questions, and hopefully people will have some. I've been thinking a little bit when Mariama invited me to this, what I would talk about, and there's been three significant, I guess, personal professional challenges I've faced in this century. So I'm older probably than a lot of the listeners here. I've been through a lot more than that, and the three were 9/11, and then the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and now coronavirus here in 2020. And I guess, and the other two have given me a sense of kind of how to deal with this crisis. And one of the lessons I think that come out of it, and I'm sure scouts know this, is the more challenges you face in life and the more those challenges you overcome, the stronger you get and the more resourceful you get. So quick story in 9/11, I was running for city council for re-election. Election day was on September 11th, 2001. And I was standing out in front of the Squantum School with a bunch of politicians and a bunch of people, probably 30 or 40 people there. And it started at 7 o'clock, and when the news hit about 8:15, 8:20 in the morning, there was a certain hush over everyone there because we didn't know exactly what was going on. Believe it or not, one of the women there was supposed to be on one of those flights, and she had transferred her flight because she wanted to be here for election day to hold signs for one of the candidates. So we were out holding signs. We had a bunch of our people there. And then by 9 o'clock, the second plane had hit the second tower. Things were obviously in a very, very bad situation. And what people on the ground didn't know was what else was coming. It was a full-blown crisis. It was pretty well aware that it was a terrorist attack, but nobody knew anything. And one by one, people started to put their signs down and go home. Some because they wanted to know what was going on, others because they were afraid. And there was a lot of discussion beginning that morning about whether we should cancel the election. And I was standing there with one other candidate, happened to be a candidate who was running for the same seat I was running for. So we were competitors that day, seeing who could get the most votes. And as it turned out, myself and Joe Finn, who was also ward counselor at large, we decided to stay. I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why. It wasn't that we were more courageous or we didn't fear as much as anyone else. We just felt we just wanted to stay, and we didn't really know what to do. And there was a lot of debate that day locally about canceling the election. And the more there was talk about canceling the election, the more we felt firm in staying there to greet whoever stopped by. And as the day went on, nobody came by. It was just Joe and I standing out there talking to each other, wondering what was in store for America, what was in store for us, what was next. And then a strange thing happened at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon after the debate ended about keeping the election going, and the governor then deciding to keep the election going, is people came out of their houses. At first it was a trickle, and then became almost a tsunami of people coming out of their houses, because what they realized, and what Joe and I had realized, is that no one was going to take this election away from us. That's what made America different from these other countries. And despite whatever the terrorists sought to do, we were, in our own little way, standing up to them. And so were all of the other residents in the city of Quincy. And it reminded me and made us both realize, first of all, it was important that we were there when people started to come to vote. But more important to us, we felt that people decided to come to vote. It was a very, very strong lesson that was then magnified over the next few months and few years as we dealt with the aftermath and made sure that both economically and otherwise we came back. And that was really the issue, and that was really the focus of the revival of New York City, the Pentagon, and the places that were damaged during 9/11. And it stuck with me to this day. I was very, very proud to say that I stood my ground, even though it was a small statement to make. And that small statement then trickled in everyone else that was coming out, not just in Massachusetts, but all over the country on that election day. So it was sending a message. And I think that's an important message to send today, that you can hide or you can stand your ground. In 2008, we faced a financial crisis. I was then state treasurer. In the middle of sort of the financial tsunami that was roiling the country at the time. Not to overuse that word, but I've been through a couple of them, it seems like. And at one point, even though it was very different than it is today, financially, there was doubts as to whether the American system would survive. Banks that had been in business for hundreds of years, literally hundreds of years, went out of business overnight. Things that happened economically to this country, no one in our lifetime had seen, and you had to go back to the Great Depression of the 1930s to even read about how bad things were and how bad we thought things were going to get. It took a lot longer to come back from that crisis, but again, I think we found strength in our small businesses and our medium-sized businesses and our stronger financial institutions to just kind of hold the line. I remember at one point in my office, there was a discussion after Lehman Brothers had failed, and after a number of companies had failed, there was a discussion that there was a large local national bank that had a local presence in Massachusetts, that there was about to be a run on that bank, meaning that the depositors were taking their money and pulling it out, and the stock started going down. We had $300 million of taxpayer money in that bank at the time, and I was the custodian of that. I was the one that decided to put it in, and I had to decide in about 20 minutes whether to keep it, whether to take it out. And what we decided to do, which I think was a wise move financially and from a fiduciary point of view, was to take the money out to protect the taxpayers in Massachusetts, but to do it quietly so as not to cause a panic. Because if people knew that the state of Massachusetts was pulling out $300 million from this bank, then they had $300 in that bank, they'd be running to that bank pulling the money out. We had to protect our assets, but we had to do it quietly so that it didn't cause a run, which I thought was prudent. And I didn't know if it was real or not. And I think that's one of the things I've learned about situations where there is a problem and then panic ensues after the problem as people don't know which way to run. Do I go upstairs like the folks at 9/11 in those office buildings? Do I go downstairs to the firemen? Do I run to the fire? Do I run away from it? You really don't know, and you have to trust your instincts. And your instincts will tell you, based on past performances, well, this is what I did then. I held my ground, and it kind of symbolically is what we did on 9/11. We stood there and held our signs all day, just because we felt we should, and we didn't know what else to do. So in 2008, we again held our ground, and that was an important message. At the same time, we acted prudently. You know, we weren't throwing taxpayer money away. We were making sure that the money was safe. And what we did for that bank is we made sure that the money went back to that bank. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't because of a material weakness that the bank had. It was because people were panicking and they didn't know where the next crisis was going to come from. And I think that's probably the most important lesson to talk about now, is the need not to panic, not to be constantly looking over your shoulder, not to be worrying about things that you can't control, but to worry about what you can control. This is different. This is not 9/11. This is not the Great Recession of 2008. This is totally, it hasn't been a situation like this since ironically 100 years ago, when the Spanish flu came to these shores and killed not just tens of thousands, but millions of people. And not just older people, but people of all different age groups. So 100 years ago, it happened. And the country had just come out of a war, World War I, and people didn't know as much about viruses, about science, about health as we know today. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that can be a dangerous thing. Too much information sometimes causes you to panic, causes you to freeze, and doesn't allow you to trust your instincts. And that's what I go back to every day. We've been dealing with this since early March, middle of March. We've been closed. I oversee, hundreds of businesses, but we're also a business ourselves. The Chamber is a nonprofit business that survives based on the fact that people pay us dues, that we hold events, that we create sponsorships. We need money to pay our staff, to pay our rent, and to function so that we can help other businesses. And if we panic, or if we don't do our job to continue to bring money in, then the chamber goes down. And if the chamber goes down, that's a very bad sign for small businesses, because, well, the chamber is supposed to be looking out for small businesses. If they're not here, what kind of hope do I have? So what we're trying to do is stabilize ourselves, again, not panic, stabilize ourselves and give hope to other small businesses. We've been open. I work from the office, my staff has been working from home, but we've been open, and we're fortunate to be open. And there's a lot of businesses that haven't been fortunate, that aren't open, that can't bring money in, they can't pay their help, they can't pay their staff, are struggling to feed their families. And if I could impart one message, is not in this fog that we're in right now, when we don't know which way to go, panic. So I'll go back to another story that I'll tell you, and I'll end with this story because I think I'm coming up on my time frame here. And it speaks to my message. So before I became a politician, I had a courier business. I was delivering packages. It wasn't FedEx, it wasn't UPS, but it was something similar to that. And this was before GPS, this was before cell phones. I had a beeper, which told me where I had to go, basically, and I had to find a payphone to respond to that beeper. And I had a map, an actual book, a map, that I used to figure out what streets I had to go on and what direction I had to be in order to deliver the package. So the challenge for me was that morning, I had left my home at about 3 a.m. to go get a package and bring that package back to the main office by 6 a.m. I had to go south, and then I had to go north. I was in Bridgewater, somewhere in Bridgewater. To this day, I have no idea where I was. I was totally and completely lost. I couldn't get to the package and then get that package where I had to go. And then I had a whole day of work to deliver other packages. And I was driving around in circles somewhere in Bridgewater in the pitch black at about 4 o'clock in the morning. There wasn't a soul. I had no cell phone. I had no access to a payphone. I had no idea what to do, and I started to get frustrated. And I started driving all over the place, and that just made me more lost. So I stopped. I literally stopped in the middle of the road, which thank God was safe because nobody else was on the road that morning, and just tried to figure out where I had been. And I retraced my steps. I just found my way out by the way I got in. And then when I did that, some way, and I don't remember exactly how, I found my way to where the package was. I found the street. I was able to look it up, find the street, get to the package, get it back up north, and get on my route. And I don't know why I remember that moment, but I always remember it when I find myself in difficult times, because I literally was panicking. And I felt like I was literally lost, not just physically, but mentally. Didn't know what to do, didn't know how to do anything. And all I could think about was a lost day, not getting packages, not getting paid. So my lesson, the message from that morning, which happened before 9/11, which happened before 2008, which happened well before 2020, was that when you're at your most difficult and stressful moment, just take a deep breath and figure out where you are. And again, this is a lesson. I probably don't have to tell Boy Scouts this lesson because they know when they're hiking somewhere or when they're on a journey, that being lost might be part of that journey. And what I did, I wasn't hiking, I wasn't on a mountain, I was in a car, but it was the same lesson. Find out go back to where you've been, find that moment, compose yourself, and then finish the journey. And which is what I did that day. Every time I've ever been in a crisis since that moment, especially when I start to panic, which I continue even in this long life that I've had, I still find myself in moments of panic. A month ago, a little more than a month ago, I panicked about what was going to happen to the chamber. There was no money coming in, and we were basically closing down in our busiest time of the year, when we had the most events, when we brought in probably 60% of our revenue. And there was no hope to collect revenue from our members because everyone was suffering. So I spent a couple of weeks panicking and trying to figure it out. And then we did. We figured it out. Our staff got together with me, and we kind of figured out a road map to bring us back. We're not out of the woods yet, and no one is. But we're certainly in a better shape today than we were 5 weeks ago. And that is a good sign, because if we can do it, anyone else can do it. There's nothing special to me or any skill set I have. I'm horrible with technology, as you can tell. There are no secrets. It's just a matter of not giving up, figuring out where you are and where you have to go, and then just taking baby steps to get there. And we're still on that journey, and we're not out of the woods yet, as I've said, but there's so many businesses that right now, and people, are where I was 6 weeks ago. And I know that with confidence, with grit, and with determination, you can get to where we are today. Just like I've done in these last 4 or 5 major crises that I've been in. And even at my age, and the years I've been in work, I anticipate hopefully living through a couple more of these, because I hopefully live long enough to see other challenges. And my message is we'll get through it. We always do. People are very capable when they're in stressful situations if they just trust their instincts. Thank you, Chuck, and thank you for listening. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that story was great about being lost for a moment. It's very reminiscent of what we teach in scouting. In terms of being lost, maybe on a hike, is the acronym STOP. Stop, think, observe, and plan. And that's what I'm listening to you speak, and like, that is so scout-like. So I guess the first question would be, did you ever grow up in Scouts? Were you a participant?
You know what? I probably should have said that at the beginning. I never was. I was never in scouting. I had friends that were. It wasn't something my parents got me into. I didn't get into scouting actually until I became an adult, through this organization, and became aware of the good things that they do. So I probably should have been. I probably would have maybe avoided some missteps later in life if I had been in scouting. But again, I think what makes good scouts, good people in the end of the day, is there's something inside you that allows you to deal with your fear, not avoid it, not run away from it, but deal with it, and then figure out a path or a way to get through whatever challenge you're facing. So even though I wasn't a real Boy Scout, I certainly have an affinity, especially based on that story. And trust me, I've been lost a lot of times in my life, physically lost a lot of times. My sense of direction, had I been a scout, I probably would have had a better sense of direction and maybe avoided some of the pitfalls that I've faced in life.
So when you mentioned avoiding some pitfalls, what are you referring to? Like, if maybe from a skill set perspective, if you learned anything from Scouts, how would you have avoided something else?
Well, I would have probably gotten to my destination a half an hour earlier back when I was a courier, because I wouldn't have panicked. I guess the lesson is that I did face a series of challenges when I was younger, but most of the challenges that came to me, the real serious challenges, came to me later in life. And I do believe that the earlier in life you challenge yourself, and you put yourself in uncomfortable situations, the more successful you'll be later in life. Not in a material sense, but you'll be able to overcome the challenges that you face. Because we're all faced them. There's no doubt in my mind that if you haven't faced a life-changing or life-altering challenge, it just hasn't come yet. Some of us face them early in life, some of us face them late in life, some in the middle, and some seem to face them all the time. So it's a good situation to put yourself in and to imagine what you might need in that kind of a situation, even though you're not going to use it 9 out of 10 times.
All right. So, your public service has been phenomenal, and thank you for all you've done as a politician, both in Quincy and for the state. Whatever attracted you to the life of public service?
I don't know. I was always interested in government. I studied history in college. I interned for a congressman in Washington, D.C. when I was in college. And that's what sort of piqued my interest. I love this man. He was our local congressman. His name was Brian Donnelly, a great man. And I really admired him. I looked up to him and I thought, this might be something I'd be interested in doing. I was always an athlete in high school and a little bit in college. And then I stopped competing and I missed competing. And one of the things I learned about politics that I loved was the competition of the campaign. For me, it was always a very athletic event. I always challenged myself. There was a beginning, there was a middle, there was an end, there was a goal. And then you got measured. How many votes? Did you win the election? Did you lose the election? And that to me is and then the challenge of actually governing, once I got into it and realized it wasn't all about elections, it was actually about trying to make things better than you found them. The challenge in getting people from different parts of life and different parts of the world all to sort of work together in one direction was sometimes mind-boggling and challenging and difficult, but that really appealed to me to try to figure that out. And the things that I most appreciate about my public service was when I was able to do that. I lost more battles than I won, but the ones that I won, I feel really good about because they made some lasting changes in people's lives in a positive manner.
Thank you. Another kind of scout-like related question. So there's many merit badges, or there's 3 merit badges in particular that have to do with citizenship. In your words, what are some of the rights and duties that make a good citizenship or makes a good citizen?
Well, I think it's probably 2 that I can think of. Not number 1 is know what the rules are. You know, what sort of how to comport yourself in public, in professional life, in student life, you know. Know what they are, but also know when to challenge them. Not all rules are good rules. Not all dictates by government are the right dictates. There are often times when you feel like you have to fight to uphold the rules because everyone else is breaking them and you think they work really well. And there are other times when you might need to break some of those rules yourself because you don't think that they're legitimate or that they're taking everyone's interest into consideration. And this coronavirus is one of those. It's been a challenging time for me because as someone who really tries to help businesses, they've been told to shut, to close. And I think the initial reason was the correct reason because we were trying to save lives and trying to maintain a medical practice that wasn't overrun in hospitals locally and across the countries. But as I found out over the last 8 to 10 weeks, some of the rules don't necessarily make sense, and you have to stand up and challenge some of those rules. They're not common sense rules. Who's deciding what's essential and what's not essential? Who can open when? I've seen good leadership come from that, and I've seen some bad leadership come from that. So like I said, I think what makes a good citizen is someone can see the difference between good leadership and bad leadership. And again, follow the good leadership and back them up. And then challenge those that you think are overstepping their bounds or making decisions that aren't in the best interest of the most people that they're elected to do.
Do you feel as though in this current time, now that you're in the chamber, do you miss politics? Do you feel like you would have been able to maybe uh, compete, as you so put it, more if you were still in maybe the capital or involved in politics?
There are times when I'm frustrated by my lack of power, so to speak, in making these decisions because unfortunately very few elected officials have a private sector background. They're either, they may be lawyers, they're more public sector and they don't necessarily understand how the private sector works. But at the same time, I think I'm in the right place at the right time for me because this is, as I tell people who have lost their jobs, who are trying to pay their rents, who have had their businesses shut down and are in danger of losing them, that it's not their fault. Nothing that's happened in the last 2 months has been the fault of any private business. The government told them to shut, and it was a health crisis, not a business crisis that made it. You didn't make this problem. So I think being able to comfort those businesses and explain that, because I've been in business and I've failed in business and I've succeeded in business. And sometimes it's been my fault and sometimes it's beyond my control. So I think I'm kind of happy that I'm where I am in a way, frustrated in some ways that I can't sort of express myself to the folks who should be thinking about folks in the position I am. But at the same time, I'm on the level that I think I can make a difference in my hometown, which I really love very much, and with businesses that people that I think might need my help. The big businesses don't need my help. They have lobbyists, they have money, they have the ear of the president, the ear of the governor. It's the folks that don't have that ear that I try to provide that opportunity for. And I'm very, very happy to be where I am today at this moment because it really is a huge challenge for us to get out of. And I want to be there to help people get out of it, even in a smaller way. And what I've seen is that the change doesn't usually happen nationally, it happens locally. And then it filters out, just like in Scouts. Scouts are local brands. It's not the national brand that runs the Scouts, it's the local brands that run the Scouts, the local groups. And that's how government should be as well, locally driven, so that we know best on the ground what's really happening. And we're going to tell Washington, and they'll either listen to us or we'll make a change so that the next group listens to us.
Now, I'm sure that the pandemic has affected Quincy businesses and owners a lot. Do you think the governor's four-step plan will help bring everything back to normal, or do you see much negative effects from this in Quincy?
There will be some. There will be some businesses that won't reopen. I don't know who they are. They might not know who they are yet. But I also think that this will create, it depends on how you look at it, it's your perspective that really matters. You can either look at it as the end of the world and the end of sort of my life as I know it, especially if you're defined by your business or you're defined by your career, or you can let it take you where it's going to take you into another direction. Before this crisis, I never did a Zoom or a GoToMeeting call. I've done hundreds since then. And my technological skills were weak, to be kind to myself. They were horrible. And they've gotten better. And we've had to learn how to survive in a little bit of a different world. So the beauty of America, I think, is that it is extremely adaptable to the situation. People come here because they want opportunity and they're willing to fight for it. And I think if people are willing to fight for their business and figure out how to get to where they want to be and are not willing to accept defeat, then they'll get through this. Sometimes it's easier to accept defeat. It really is. It feels easier at the time anyways to quit. I've often faced that conundrum. Should I quit and go home or should I keep going? And I've often tried to fight through that. Should I quit and go home? Because I don't want that to gnaw at me for the rest of my life that I quit on something when I know I could have gotten through. Even if I didn't succeed at what I was hoping to succeed at, I might have found another way to get somewhere else. I mean, I lost the last election I competed in. and my political career ended pretty abruptly. And now 10 years later, I find myself here again in the center of a storm, and with hopefully with some knowledge that I can help some people that, because I've been in those storms before. So you never know where life is going to take you. And if you think you do, trust me, every decade something will come around to sort of remind you that you don't know anything. And if you're not willing to adapt and figure out how to get through in a different society or at a different time frame, then you will fail. So adaptability is hugely important. And you have to just figure out like I said, every decade of my life that I can remember almost from the beginning, I've been faced with a huge challenge. And, sometimes just graduating from high school is a huge challenge for a lot of people, so it's not like, business or a political career, but just getting from 8th grade to 9th grade, figuring out how to get the fire started because I'm freezing and I need to start a fire at night. And I've been taught how to do it, but it's wet and it's challenging and I can't do it. You get through that, or you spend a really cold night without it, and then you'll figure it out after that. So the main thing is to just keep moving forward, and not let the obstacles define you, but sort of define them.
Excellent. We have another question. So this is maybe a two-parter here, and I think it follows great after what you just mentioned. What strengths from being a politician have transferred over to your current job, as well as what, in your eyes, do you think is the most important character trait of a good leader?
Well, I think to answer the first half of the question, I think figuring out how to get things done with different groups of people that have different agendas has probably something I learned more in my public life that have really been able to transition over. And it's a great skill to have, because politics really is in every profession. There's, we call it politics as because it's our government, but every business has politics within it. We have to figure out, where the power structure is, how to get done what you want to get done, who's going to try to stop you from doing it for whatever reason that they're going to try to stop you. So there's always challenges, and being in the, sort of in the arena has taught me a lot, that has been applicable to so much of my life in the private sector and in the public sector. And the second half of that question again, Chuck, can you repeat that?
What would be the most important character trait of a good leader, in your opinion?
There's probably too many for me to list, but I think following your instinct and your gut is always served me well. It isn't always right, and I've made mistakes because I've followed my gut, but I usually can live with those mistakes. It's the mistakes I make when I listen to too many people and sort of go astray because I don't trust my instincts. And I think that's a very important aspect to have in public life, as I had, but even in the private sector and in life in general. If you've prepared yourself and if you have become knowledgeable about whatever situation you're in, even if it's on a hike, you know what the terrain is, you know where you started, where you're supposed to go, you have a compass, you know how to use it. Trust your instincts, I think, it will always get you to the end of the road eventually. Maybe not in the straightest fashion, in the straightest line, so to speak, but they'll get you there. And I think that that's something that I've learned to live with, because every time I don't do it, I usually miss something or lose a battle. And when I do it, it makes me feel better. It gives me more confidence as well.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we get time for one more question. We can wrap up. Is there any advice that you would give anybody, any young people in the audience, or anybody in general, in terms of whether it be, how to follow your career path or any life lessons that you might want to pass on?
Well, I mean, geez, I wouldn't advise anyone to follow my career path, to be honest with you, unless you're prepared for more defeats than victories. But I'll be honest with you, the defeats make the victories much more enjoyable. And the bigger the challenge, the more joy I feel in my accomplishments. And I think what I'd like to impart more so, and I think it's very applicable to this time, is don't run away from challenges, don't run away from pain, don't run away from defeat. It's best to face it head on, and figure out, you don't always have to go through it, you don't always have to go over it, sometimes you can go around it, but whichever path turns out to be the right one, and you often don't know that in advance. But I do think it's best to face your challenges, because when you don't face them, they just get worse, they get bigger, and they become much harder to solve later in life, or later in the situation. So, and that's been applicable my whole life. It isn't easy to do, and most often my first choice is to hide or to try to avoid the tough decision. But I think at the end of the day, every time I've made that tough decision and faced it down, it makes the rest of the decisions I make in life much easier. And I think it's why that I fear less as I get older. And I don't think that there's too much I haven't seen. The more I see, the more I know that I can go back to one of my previous lives or one of my previous experiences and get through whatever's in front of me.
Thank you very much.